I got one that I feel like is really good for Twitter.
Okay.
If you could give a 2-minute, 1-minute piece of advice to all people coming into modern web dev.
I don't know
Because that's
anything
where a
about
lot of-
modern web dev. What? Don't do it. What do you mean?
Well, because that's where a lot of people enter into, right? Like that's
Sure.
that will always be the entrance, and because it's just the easiest to get something on the screen and theoretically make $1 million by making another chat wrapper. So,
Yeah.
so if you were to give somebody an advice other than don't do it, what would you say to them that could potentially put them on the right track? So in 10 years they look back and say that guy was right.
I'm gonna say what I think the right answer is, and
Okay.
this
you
may
can't say
not.
don't do it. You can say whatever you'd like. But
Yeah, don't do it. But here's the thing. Okay, the web started. I saw the very, very beginnings of the web and chose not to participate. So just to spend like 30 seconds giving a little background, I was at UC Berkeley. I was in this place called the Experimental Computing Facility, which is just like students enthusiastic about programming. The GIMP guys were there a couple years after me. That's why the file extension for GIMP is .xcf, because they came out of like the same computing lab. A little bit of trivia for you.
I did not know that.
Yes.
I've always
that's
wondered
good.
about that.
So the X in XCF stands for experimental.
Yes. So this was like when, if you had a computer at home, it was like a Commodore 64 or like a not that good of a PC. You didn't have an equivalent of a Unix operating system at home. That was not a thing. And so if you wanted to program real programs on real computers, there were these workstation class computers that were in relatively short supply. There was a whole controversy that like the XCF snagged allocations from the university that were meant for another group called the Open Computing Facility. And there was like a war between the students about this. All that happened a little bit before I showed up. Okay. So there was a guy next to me named Pei Wei who wrote one of the first web browsers before I even knew what that was. It was called the Viola browser. It doesn't exist anymore, but you could look it up. And I was at an early conference and Mark Andreessen was there and everybody was angry at Mark Andreessen. Because,
Some things never change.
Yes. He was making the Mosaic browser at University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, and web browsers didn't have images at that time. They just couldn't display bitmaps on the screen. And there was a discussion underway that was one of these laborious committee discussions that Casey's talking about, because it was like, we're the web community. We want to make sure we think about these and do everything. And he was like, you know, angle bracket, IMG, angle bracket, file name or whatever, you know, URL, boom, it puts it on the screen. And they were all mad at him for implementing that and having images in his browser before everybody else. So that was my experience of the web. And like, I didn't really love it. I didn't stay in web from that time. But it was so even Viola, right, was very visionary in the following way. It was not just a web browser that put the text on the screen, but it had an embedded programming language that was interpreted. It was a lot like JavaScript, but it was a different language. So it was not really semantically equivalent. And then JavaScript came again, you know, a couple years later or whatever, you know, 96 or whatever year it was, 95.
Yep,
When
December 4th,
Brendan Eich
1995
famously
was
did it
co-announced
in
Java.
10 days, right?
Yeah.
The reason it made sense to do something like this in 10 days was that, like, look, it's just to change a couple state variables in the browser about whether they push the button or it's not for real programs. So it doesn't need to be very serious. And so we don't need to use all the, we want it to be cross-platform. So it's just going to be a very lightweight language, right? Okay. Fast forward. And now it's like the language that most software is written in, right?
Yes.
Nobody
What
thought
can
that
be
was
written in JavaScript will be written in JavaScript is the considered truth of
and,
JavaScript.
and so the problem with all that is that somehow we forgot all this thing that we knew about programming. Like it kind of like it doesn't matter what programming language you use because the computer knows how to run some back-end representation, which in the old days was machine language, right? So then you move to the browser, you're like, we want it to be portable, so it can't be machine language, right? But like it wouldn't have even taken that long. If I had a time machine, it's like, do you try to find baby Hitler and re-educate him to be a kind and loving young boy? Or do you try to find Brendan Eich and say, look, spend 2 more days to make a little bytecode engine so that you're language agnostic on the front end, right?
Really, Really big
One
decisions
of,
there at the time.
one of
machine.
software's biggest questions.
Yeah. So I don't know I'm not
was
serious.
amazing.
Obviously, the answer is Baby Hitler. I'm not. That's not really a joke. But because Baby Hitler was so much earlier in time that maybe everything would have gone better after that. And you know what? Yeah. So, but the point being, like, it used to be before the web that, like, if you wanted a language with strong type checking, you had your pick of a whole bunch and they all worked the same, and they all targeted the same backend at the same level of quality. So it's not like you were using some janky transpiler to like build some massive 10x too large amount of bloat code that you can't debug or anything. It's just like they would target, I mean, those things did exist too, but you didn't have to use them because you had choices, right? And like we threw all that away and we made this thing where like now there's an interpreter engine and it just runs this one thing and then you can have wrappers around that one thing, right? Okay, so now we also ostensibly have WebAssembly, but it just, because it came in later and people are not, like, all these companies also benefit from the fact that they're the only few people who can make browsers, right, as well, that there's no competition there. And so, like, Google loves that, dude. That's why they put so many resources into the browser. And so they're disincentivized from making it easy to retarget, like, to control your own computing environment, let's say, right? Because if there's a very simple substrate and you don't need Google's permission to have new features or whatever, they can't leverage that against you in the future as part of their more, like, it would enable incumbent browsers to come in and displace their market share and all that, right? Okay.
It's actually worse than that, because also you have companies like Apple who are actively invested in not having the web be very good, because if it was, then you don't have to use the App Store.
Yes. Yo, there's like every...
And that's not hypothetical. They literally,
Yeah.
like, you can literally go watch them do that in the minutes of W3C meetings, which I have done, and it's frankly pretty disgusting.
Yeah, so every big company has a different angle on this, but they're all kind of in common. Every angle is about kind of capturing more market share and preventing their current market share from being eroded in the future by competition, right? So that's... This is all a long-winded way of saying, okay, there's good things about a browser. You can just open a web page and just there's a program running. And that's something that we didn't used to have. It didn't used to be that easy. But like, we didn't have to throw away all the good things about system software to get that. And there's this fundamental confusion about this. Like, if you just targeted an equivalent to a machine language, but that's cross-platform, well-defined, it has some instruction set, and then the browser was interpreting that, which is, again, ostensibly what WebAssembly is, but it like doesn't quite get there for, I don't know, various reasons. And it's certainly not the default, right? But if we had that, you could run real debuggers on your web program, right? You could do all these things. And so getting that back, like, those tools are actually incredibly valuable if you want your software to be high quality, because they bring in a level of analyzability and understandability that we just didn't have once we made the jump to interpreted languages by default. So getting back there would be great. And so this has been a 28-minute long answer, by which I'm saying you could like work on getting back some of the things that we lost and getting them back into web infrastructure so that we could have the best of both worlds. You could have the convenience, right? But also the quality and robustness of older systems, and that would be great.